Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate, and today we're going to be talking about just basically what's going to be happening within the next week, maybe 2 weeks if we get enough time for it. But yeah, first couple of videos that I'm going to be making is going to be a little shaky, especially since I'm going to be trying to play catch up and figuring out what all is going on. And most of you all already know that I kind of have a side job since I'm not going to college at the moment for personal reasons. But regardless, we're going to get straight into the video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share with friends and family. I would greatly appreciate that, to be quite honest with you. It helps me out with YouTube's algorithm, and it also helps you out because then not only you get informed, but everyone else who's watching my content can get informed. So that'd be greatly appreciated. We'll get straight into the topic, which is basically severe weather is on the horizon. It may not seem like it right now. If we go over to the Storm Prediction Center, you can see within the first 3 days, it's classified as no severe. So I don't want any update right now. I could do that later. But you could see Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Today is Friday. Excuse me. We're doing this live. You could see Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's no severe. And the main reason for that is because there's just this giant high pressure due to the Rocky Mountains that's kind of sit up. And there's this giant low pressure that's kind of blocking everything from moving through. Now there is an interesting surface low pressure that's moving out from the Oklahoma-Texas region that stirred up a marginal risk yesterday for 5% chance of hail over an inch. But most of those storms were elevated, so nothing really occurred off of that event. But as soon as this moves out, there's going to be a nice little ridge here that'll develop, and you'll see some warm temperatures spread across the board, actually. So it'll be some pretty interesting times for most of you, since it's been some relentless cold, maybe some ice and snow in much parts of the southern plains, up into the northern plains, maybe even to the Midwest. So good for you all in getting a warm up, and you guys could finally be released from that cold. But the reason why I say that severe weather is on the horizon is that if you take a look at this over here, you can see that there is something pretty interesting. You can see some rain, you can see bits and bobs of snow, but rain and snow doesn't just appear out of thin air. So that technically you would think that would be a low pressure. And if we move it along, we use the GFS model here. If we move it along here, you can see that there's this low pressure that kind of moves along the coast and just develops straight up, which is really interesting here. But the thing of it is, too, is that there's another low pressure that just automatically appears. And what we call that, where it's just born out of thin air with some forcing from the jet stream, is cyclogenesis. This happens right along the mountains. It always happens along the mountains because it's at a higher or lower pressure, I should say. So it's able to form any sort of disturbances because it's, lower pressure. If you're at lower elevations, tends to be a higher pressure. So cyclogenesis occurs, and you have one low pressure at the rear here that's about to move through California. You have another right here that just appeared from the mountains. And this is where I say severe weather is on the horizon. This is Wednesday morning, or Wednesday around noon. But right around then, you can see we're starting to get a little bit of storms. And then when it moves across, this is around 4 o'clock Eastern, so 3 o'clock Central. Boom. Look at this. Storms form whole line from this. And that could bring some gusty winds. Maybe. If you're a bit further south, could potentially have a risk for tornadoes. Definitely hail, I would say. But if we watch along the southern line here, because there's a bunch more moisture than there is up north, there could be some severe weather for southern parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. But if we move on further here, you can kind of see how more storms just kind of fire off over and over again throughout this week. And that's mainly because this low pressure that's kind of seeped in through behind the storm. I'll play it again. You can see this low pressure right here. If you watch these kind of bars and how they like kind of curl out like this, you can notice how they curl inland and they move into that general vicinity. And that's where this giant mess of a low pressure kind of just sits. And that's where more thunderstorms start to fire off. So you can get some more straight line winds across parts of the Ohio River Valley and further into the Central Plains. But this can't be, this can't just be right. Usually you'd have a low pressure that would just move off. It can't just sit there. And that goes back into what's happening up at the top, which is your blocking. You have your low pressure, you have a high pressure down here, and then you have another high pressure which is off the screen up near Greenland. And that's kind of just making everything stay still. It's staying in place. And so when you get these events, they're kind of just being forced to stay still, and you can get some repeated chances of severe weather, definitely some opportunity for flooding. But it would have to be localized because some of these areas are not getting hit in the same exact spot. Maybe at later time frames, but not exactly the same spot. But we'll get back into that as to how and the more of the mechanics as to why the low pressure is sitting where it is. But let's get to the temperature. And this is pretty interesting too, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, there is a warm-up that's going to occur prior to the severe weather. And it doesn't seem like it right now because this is live. This is the latest data that the GFS has given to us. You can see the temperatures, the lows, are below freezing for most parts of the Ohio River Valley into the northeast and kind of the northern mid-Atlantic. Some other areas, especially in the Rocky Mountains, it's below freezing as well. But you also have some temperatures along the south that is in the 50s and 60s as a low, which is actually pretty good. It's actually not bad at all. But you can see how as the day goes on, temperatures will start to rise. You can see how it even gets up into Canada, some of the 60s and all. Just a general warm-up for the US, I would say, which is something that's been long overdue in my honest opinion. But still, the warm-up hasn't officially came yet. You can still see temperatures are still, kind of shaky. This is a high pressure. This is the high for Saturday, and how it only gets up to 69, maybe even 70. That's in South Dakota. Everywhere else, it's going to be in the lower 60s and the upper 50s, especially if you live in the deep South. So it's not exactly warming up yet. It's kind of that neutral temperature. The temperature that makes you feel good, which is usually around 60 to 70, maybe 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm pretty sure everyone can agree with that and saying that that's around like the comfortable temperature. It's your typical room temperature. So it's sub-comfortable in some areas. But as I said, that's not the heat up yet. As it continues to move on through, you can see temperatures are now starting to reach the 60s across most of the portions that we're looking at. Plains heading into the deep south. Maybe not exactly the mid-Atlantic or the northeast yet, because the northeast is still dealing with that low pressure that's just been sitting there. But it's still kind of warming up. And then once we head into Monday, look at this. Some of these areas, especially along the western panhandle of Oklahoma into those parts of Texas, Colorado, Kansas. Oh yeah, you can get some temperatures up in the 70s, maybe mid 70s as well. And to make it even better for everyone, here's your warm up too. Next Tuesday, look at this, 80s. 80s across the board. Dodge City's 81. And even then, if you're not in the main 80 spot in the Central Plains and the Southern Plains, look at this. The Midwest, all the way into the Ohio River Valley, is getting 60s, which is comfortable, really comfortable. Mid-Atlantic is in the 60s. The Northeast isn't dealing with sub-freezing temperatures. It's actually dealing with 40s and 50s. Maybe 30s if you're a bit further north, but there's not really a whole lot of population up there. So it's mainly just 50s and 40s. But then right around this time, that's when the severe weather starts to kick in. And you can see how there's a steep drop off right here. And this is the cold front that kind of just whittles its way through. And this is the severe weather I'm talking about here. Now, with this, there may not be a whole lot of severe weather for that Tuesday, the 9th. But Wednesday, the 10th, definitely we could start to see a little kickoff of severe weather. And that's something that we should really kind of just keep in mind as it moves on through. And you can see how, as it continues to push off, warm air pushes up, or what we like to say, advects from the Gulf and moves up into the low pressure area where the warm front kind of just carries all this moisture out in front of the cold front, and all that moisture ends up being used and pushes on through, and that's how you get these strong storms. And typically if you see some storms that are like really bad, you'll see these up in the 90s, and you'll see the dew points. They're like around 60 right now. They would typically be in around the 70s, maybe even mid to upper 70s. So speaking of dew points, let's take a look at that real quickly before we get into the wind shear, because I do love to look at, there's a specific height and wind shear that I love to look at to determine the type of severe weather event we're going to be getting, as well as the patterns that we could be seeing. So this is the dew points right now across the board. Single digits up in the Northeast. That's mainly because there's not enough moisture to get up there. The low pressure is kind of just exhausted it all, so it's just going to be this giant, cool and dry atmosphere that's going to continue to be a bit brisky for you all. I'm not sure if there's still wind chill warnings out there, but still, or wind chill advisories, I should say, but there's still pretty brisky up there, especially with all that cold, dry air. But you can see how the low pressure is kind of brought up some moisture into some areas of Texas and Oklahoma. But as that kind of moves off, it's going to be relatively dry for the most part this weekend. Saturday and Sunday, some of these areas, the dew points won't get too high, which will be kind of comfortable. It'll be really comfortable, actually. But that's when we start looking at Tuesday. And Tuesday is when things start to get pretty interesting. Now, don't get me wrong. 40s into the low 50s is not that big of a dew point. If you want dew points for severe weather, in my honest opinion, 55 will work, but I'd rather be 60 or above. I wouldn't go any lower than 55 degrees. If it is, then it's just not really going to work a whole lot. But you'll see that more and more moisture begins to, as I like to say, advect north. Look at this. Dew points near Houston, Corpus Christi, 60s. Mid to upper 50s for much of eastern Texas into Louisiana, central 50s. Look at this. Across the areas that we're going to be watching for in Kansas and Oklahoma, it's already in the mid 50s, and it's not even the day of. This is the 9th on Tuesday. So as it continues to move up, you can see more moisture begins to advect, and you can kind of see that cold front kind of push through, and here's your low pressure. You can tell because it kind of always has this little lip, per se. The reason why it has that lip is because the low pressure kind of just drags the moisture around the low. So You can see this is the cold front. There's a dry line right behind it. You can see the little tan area behind. That's the dry line. And that will kind of push off. But the thing that's interesting here is that this is Wednesday. You know, time's flown here. This is Wednesday evening for Oklahoma and Kansas. And we've already got dew points in the 60s. 60s. Which is not bad for this year, honestly. For this time of year, for this type of event. So there is enough moisture for this thing to kick off if you needed it to. Not that anyone needed this storm to kick off, but it's still... Look at this. 61 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the dew points all the way throughout the evening. And there's still more dews that will continue to evac through because the cold front doesn't actually move. It's kind of like a stationary front. And then this is where things get interesting, because this is what I was actually looking at earlier. Is that Friday the 12th. Look at this. Look at this line right here. This right here could be some severe weather if conditions get its act together. I'll take a sounding out in front of it, but what's actually happening is there's this giant warm layer at 700 millibars, which it's a specific height up in the sky. So 700 millibars in this case is about 3 kilometers up in the sky. So it'd be right about here. And you can see this red line right here. I'm looking at a skew-T diagram, or skew-T chart, as people would say. And this red line kind of just dips out. And what this is telling me is that there is a huge warm layer that's kind of cutting off the storms a little bit. It'll be more of like this kind of, you know, capping inversion. So it's not exactly like the best event in the world, but it's not exactly the worst either. But it's still 183 hours out, so that's something that we'll definitely continue to watch. But as of right now, there could be a potential for severe weather on the 12th. There could be chance for severe weather on the 10th, and there could be some severe weather moving forward, even on the 13th. Honestly, the 13th could be a nice little target for the deep south. So that's something to keep in mind there. All right, I did say I wanted to get into the wind shear, and 500 millibar winds technically is the wind shear that everyone would look at, mainly because it kind of determines where the jet stream is, and if you have any surface lows, where that would be. And so you can see right here, look at this swirl right here. This right here is a massive low pressure, and that's just kind of being blocked. There's nothing really much we can do about that besides the fact that it's just going to be blocked. But you can also see here, you have this dip in the trough because of this low pressure and how the band is kind of swirling around. And you have a new trough that's kind of developing here. The only abnormality in all this is that where you would see a high pressure out in the middle, which there is, you also see a surface low that is pushing through, and that'll eventually move out of the deep south and the southern plains. But you know, this is your typical setup that you would have for severe weather. Now let's move along through a couple of days, and you can see, as I was saying, this low pressure is just sitting there. I mean, look at this. It's just, there's nothing much you can do about it. This surface low has been pushed off down to the south, and there's a new setup that's coming in behind it, as well as this jet stream kind of just screaming across the mountains, which when I said in the earlier parts of this video about cyclogenesis, you'll be able to see how along these mountains, these rocky mountains here, you'll be able to see how the low pressure kind of develops only in these areas. Actually, as a matter of fact, to give you all some evidence as to what happened earlier, let's see, this was earlier on. Yeah, so Actually, that came off of the coast, so disregard that. Tell how up to date I've been with weather. I thought that was a bit of cyclogenesis itself, but instead it just kind of maintained and dodged the mountains. So that's something that's pretty nice. Anyways, back to our regularly scheduled program. You can see the jet stream. Kind of a bit of a dip now since the low pressure system has slowly moved off to the north and east. So here's the dip in the jet stream all the way over here. Here's your ridge. And that's where the warm temperatures are going to kind of seep up into the coast. But as I mentioned before in the beginning of this video, severe weather is on the horizon, and this is what we should be looking for over here. As it continues to move on through, you can see the jet stream now begins to reach parts of the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and that's where that cyclogenesis is going to occur. And so you'll be able to see, you can kind of see how it starts to get all bumpy and stuff like that, right? Along these little isobars. So as it continues to move on through, then you'll be able to get your low pressure system, which you can actually tell is right around here at the moment. Right about here. I think that's about right. Yep. And as that continues to push off, you can see that there is another low pressure system that's going to be occurring down around Arizona that'll be pushing through. And that's the reason why you'll get multiple rounds of severe storms in the Central Plains. But, you know, something to keep in mind here is look at this jet stream. Look at this jet stream. I'll backtrack a couple hours. Jet stream starts and it pushes off right here. This is as far north as it gets, except for Canada, but we can disregard that, all right? Look at this line and look south of the line. And look at how long this jet stream is here for. Watch. Look at how long it's there for. It's there for a good portion of the week. Like 7 days. So, you know, look at this. Draw a line right here again. This is Wednesday night. So I know it says Thursday 0Z, but 0Z for universal time, it's always 5 hours before Eastern time and 6 hours before Central time. But it's only on standard time. When they move the clocks forward in a couple of weeks, or I think a week. I think it's a week. Then it'll move to daylight time, and it'll be 4 hours ahead of Eastern and 5 hours ahead of Central. So, but for right now, this is Wednesday night, and you can see the wind shear here that's just being held in place. But as we continue to watch, look, it's being held in place, being held in place, held in place, all the way into Saturday evening. And look at that. It's just kept there. So this wind shear, because there's a low pressure right here, this jet stream has to curl around this low pressure and continue to feed up. Because remember, there's still that low pressure up there that's moving through Greenland. So that's really something to keep in mind. Now, I would end the video here, but I do want to discuss one more thing into what this means for the future. This pattern right here is really interesting, mainly because when I see it, two things can always happen. Number one is usually when you have this big a dip in the jet stream that's kind of forced by a low pressure that just rides along, you tend to transition into this high trough, high ridge pattern to where you can start to go a bit more north-south with your tilts. And you'll actually see at the end part of this model run, you can see, look at this giant ridge. Giant ridge that actually gets up into Canada. But then as it continues to move on through, you can kind of see how you have more low pressure systems that kind of just move off. There's one right here, one right here, and one right here. Now, this isn't really this big of a dip in the jet stream. And this is also, you know, take this end of the model run with a grain of salt, mainly because it's so far out. But typically when you have this massive dip in the jet stream, you follow it up with another dip or another trough later on in the week. Or the other thing that could happen is this low could end up being cut off and the jet stream reconnects up at the top. And so this would just be a cutoff low that'll just be moving through. And you'll have normal temperatures throughout most parts of the central US. But a lot of you I know have been, you know, waiting around. And you've been waiting for me to stream a whole lot. And since my first live stream was on Sundays, which, by the way, click the notification bell if you want to get up to date with all of my content, whether it's live severe weather and stuff like that, because I do that. I say I have arguably the best severe weather live streams, or at least the coverage. But, you know, it's one of those things to where this low could be cut off, and it could push through, and temperatures could be relatively even. But yeah, that's basically gonna be it. I hope you guys enjoyed, because I'm gonna be making videos from now on with the occasional sprinkle of live streams, as you guys see on this YouTube channel. That's what we're mainly here for. So if you guys have any thoughts about these storms, as I said, severe weather is on the horizon. It's 100%. You could see some by the middle of next week. And then from there, mainly because the models are kind of iffy after that point, that's when you can kind of see, yeah, you could see an uptrend in severe weather, especially in the southeast here. I actually think that the Dixie Alley region could get more severe weather. Or you can see an uptrend into what May wasn't, and see some action returning to the Central Plains, which is already forecasted for the middle of next week. So we'll have to see. But if you guys like the content, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, share it with friends and family, yada yada. Follow me on Twitch if you want to see me play video games with people that you know, like Morgan and Mason, as well as Logan. That will be in the link in the description down below. And yeah, appreciate you guys for coming out. I will see you all next time. Peace.